The National Liberation Council led the Ghanaian government from February 24, 1966 to October 1, 1969. The body emerged from a violent coup d'etat against the civilian government led by Kwame Nkrumah. The Ghana Police Service and Ghana Armed Forces carried out the coup jointly, with collaboration from the Ghana Civil Service. It is alleged that the plotters were well connected with the governments of Britain and the United States, who some believe approved of the coup because Nkrumah challenged the political and economic ambitions in Africa. The new government implemented structural adjustment policies recommended by the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. Money in the national budget shifted away from agriculture and industrialization towards the military. National enterprises, property, and capital were privatized or abandoned, whereas Nkrumah had condemned the development projects of multinational corporations as signs of neocolonialism. The NLC allowed foreign conglomerates to operate on extremely favorable terms. The Ghanaian cedi was devalued by 30%. These economic changes did not succeed in reducing the country's debt or in increasing the ratio of exports to imports. The National Liberation Council regime won support from powerful groups in Ghanaian society, local chiefs, intelligentsia, and business leaders, as well as the expanding military and police forces. However, its policies of economic austerity were not beloved of workers at large, who suffered from increasing unemployment and repression of strikes. In 1969 the regime underwent a carefully managed transition to civilian rule. Elections held on August 29, 1969 thus inaugurated a new government led by the NLC's chosen successor, the Progress Party of Kofi Abrefa-Busia. 1966 coup. Political climate. From 1951 to 1966, Ghana was controlled by the Convention People's Party and its founder Kwame Nkrumah. During the 1950s, the CPP sponsored a variety of popular economic projects and in the process created a large foreign debt. In 1960 the CPP moved to nationalize the Ghanaian economy and heavily tightened its control in areas such as currency and taxation. By 1963 the public was suffering from shortages and price gouging. Fewer and fewer business people benefited from party membership. Amidst growing unpopularity, the party increased its repression of political opponents. It used the Preventive Detention Act against its opponents and in 1964 banned competing parties. Press freedom reached a low ebb as evidenced in the October 1965 statement by the Ghanaian Times. Our socialist society cannot, and would not, tolerate the publication of any newspaper in Ghana which departs from the ideology and loyalties demanded from the press in socialist and Nkrumahist Ghana. General Afrifa later commented, regarding Radio Ghana, "From early morning till late at night there poured forth a sickening stream of Stalinist adulation and abject flattery. News was so often distorted and suppressed that Ghanaians stopped believing what they heard." The party acted as a political monolith, with functional control over powerful civil organizations such as the Ghana Trades Union Congress and Ghana Muslim Council. Thus, the CPP had centralized political and economic power in order to pursue rapid industrialization under national control. Behind the scenes was an elite group of economic planners which stood to advance its agenda under military rule. These technocrats within the government found common cause with the military and police in the disdain for the mass politics of the Convention People's Party. One such figure was B.A. Bentham, former Secretary-General of the Agricultural Workers' Union and subsequently the Minister of Forestry under the CPP. Bentham disapproved of the country's socialist tendencies and collaborated with the plotters by supplying them with information. Kojo Botsio, chairman of the State Planning Commission, was similarly disposed if not as closely involved. Military and police dissatisfaction. Nkrumah faulted the police for allowing an attempted bombing against him in 1962. When on January 2, 1964, a police officer shot at Nkrumah and killed his bodyguard, the police force was reorganized from above. 8 top officers were dismissed, and the rank and file were disarmed. Subsequently, in April 1965, the Police Service Act gave Nkrumah direct authority to hire and fire police. Nkrumah also removed the Special Branch Intelligence Service from the police force and brought it under civilian control. Police Commissioner John Harley and his second-in-command Anthony Deku had long aspired to take control of the government. Harley had compiled a large dossier on corruption within the CPP and used these files to gain legitimacy for his cause. To take over the country, however, the police force had to work with the military, not only because they had been disarmed, but also because, as the primary executors of repression and brutality under the CPP, they did not enjoy a good reputation with the general public. Coup planners from the military identified mistreatment of the armed forces, and preferential treatment of the president's own guard regiment, as sources of the dissatisfaction. The salaries of soldiers and officers, set in 1957, had lost much of their value amidst general inflation, and the army did not have money for new uniforms and equipment. Some key figures of the coup had come into personal conflict with Nkrumah. O2's the Chief of Defense Staff, and Ankara, the Deputy Chief, had been fired in August 1965 and replaced with officers considered more loyal. The generals later claimed that actions such as these represented an overreach of civilian power over the military. Afrifa was facing a court-martial for insubordination, to begin on February 25, 1966. Harley and Deku were accused of involvement in a newly exposed scheme to illicitly sell diamonds to a European dealer, according to rumor. Nkrumah would have arrested them upon return to the country. Ethnic loyalties may also have influenced some of the coup planners. A significant number came from the U group, which had been divided by the border with Togo and felt it had received unfair treatment under Nkrumah and the CPP. The U officers, who formed the inner circle of the coup, all grew up in the same area, and Harley and Kotoko both attended Anglo-American Presbyterian school. The coup planners had all received training in Britain, either at Metropolitan Police College or at Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, and were widely perceived as pro-Western. In general, the Ghanaian officer corps was deeply Anglophilic and saw British culture as an indicator of status. Thus, they already objected to Nkrumah's dismissal of British officers in 1961. Nor were they pleased about an ongoing realignment away from Britain to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics for officer training. Air Marshal Otter would write in June 1968 that Ghana had become a single-party totalitarian dictatorship. It had also abrogated personal liberties. It had thrown to the wind sacred principle of the rule of law, reduced elections to a farce and much worse, spurned all its traditional ties with the West in favor of dubious advantages of association with strange friends from the East. Accusations of Anglo-American involvement. Some of the first allegations about United States involvement in the coup came from retired CIA officer John Stockwell in his 1978 book, In Search of Enemies. In a footnote comment comparing the coup in Ghana to more recent operations in the Congo, Stockwell wrote, "This is the way the ouster of Nkrumah was handled in Ghana, 1966. The 40 committee had met and rejected an agency proposal to oust Nkrumah. The Accra station was nevertheless encouraged by headquarters to maintain contact with dissidents of the Ghanaian army for the purpose of gathering intelligence on their activities. It was given a generous budget, and maintained intimate contact with the plotters as a coup was hatched. So close was the station's involvement that it was able to coordinate the recovery of some classified Soviet military equipment by the United States. As the coup took place, the station even proposed to headquarters through back channels that a squad be on hand at the moment of the coup to storm the Chinese embassy, kill everyone inside, steal the secret records, and blow up the building to cover the fact. This proposal was quashed, but inside CIA headquarters the Accra station was given full, if unofficial, credit for the eventual coup, in which 8 Soviet advisors were killed. None of this was adequately reflected in the agency written records. Historian John Prados has written that it has not been verified that the CIA had any role in directing the coup, though they were aware of the tensions which were rising between the Ghana military and the Nkrumah government. CIA operative Howard Bain even claimed in February of 1966 that a string of coups which had occurred in other African nations were also motivating the Ghana military to topple Nkrumah. Memoranda released in 2001 suggest that the United States and United Kingdom discussed a plan to induce a chain reaction eventually leading to Nkrumah's downfall. Relevant files from the British intelligence service MI6 remain classified. Britain and the United States began discussions of regime change in Ghana in 1961. Details of plans from this time are mostly unknown, since declassified documents from this period remain censored. One such plot involved Finance Minister K.A. Gabidima, who secured CIA and State Department support for a plan to overthrow Nkrumah, but was detected by the National Intelligence Service. Central Intelligence Agency interest in Ghana increased again in 1964, when Director of Central Intelligence John A. McCone began participating in high-level meetings to discuss future relations with the country. On February 6, 1964, U.S. Secretary of State Dean Rusk asked McCone to study the possibility of a government takeover led by J.A. Ankara. McCone indicated on February the 11th that such a policy might be pursued in cooperation with the British. On February 26, 1964, Nkrumah wrote to U.S. President Lyndon Johnson criticizing 2 conflicting establishments operating in Ghana. There is the United States Embassy as a diplomatic institution doing formal diplomatic business with us. There is also the CIA organization which functions presumably within or outside this recognized body. This latter organization, that is, the CIA, seems to devote all its attention to fomenting ill will, misunderstanding and even clandestine and subversive activities among our people, to the impairment of the good relations which exist between our 2 governments. When in early 1965 Nkrumah requested financial assistance from the United States, the State Department turned him down and suggested he ask the IMF. Nevertheless, U.S. President Lyndon Johnson did agree to lend him financial aid for the Volta River projects. The U.S. was reluctant to negotiate with Nkrumah partly because they foresaw a coup d'etat led by Ankara and Harley. In April, the embassy in Accra submitted a report to the State Department titled Proposed United States Aid Posture Toward a Successor Government to Nkrumah's. A U.S. National Security Council memo from Robert Kwame to McGeorge Bundy appraised the situation. MCGB, FYI, we may have a pro-Western coup in Ghana soon. Certain key military and police figures have been planning one for some time, and Ghana's deteriorating economic condition may provide the spark. The plotters are keeping us briefed, and State thinks we're more on the inside than the British. While we're not directly involved, we and other Western countries have been helping to set up the situation by ignoring Nkrumah's pleas for economic aid. The new OCAM group's refusal to attend any OAU meeting in Accra will further isolate him. All in all, looks good. RWK Nkrumah himself feared for his life and felt great distress during this time. Diplomatic relations with the West seemed to deteriorate, with Nkrumah's publication of Neo-Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism, and his criticism of Britain's response to the secession of White Rhodesia. Nkrumah also resisted economic policies proposed in May 1965 by the International Monetary Fund and reasserted by the World Bank in September 1965. Nkrumah left the country on February 21, 1966 for a diplomatic meeting with Ho Chi Minh. He traveled first to China. The United States encouraged him to go on this diplomatic mission and indeed promised to halt the bombing of North Vietnam in order to ensure his safety. A group of 600 soldiers stationed in the northern part of the country were ordered to start moving south to Accra, a distance of 435 miles. They were told at first that they were mobilizing to respond to the situation in Rhodesia. The coup leaders told the soldiers, when they reached Accra, that Nkrumah was meeting with Ho Chi Minh in preparation for a deployment of Ghanaian soldiers to the Vietnam War. Furthermore, the soldiers were told they were going to be deployed in Rhodesia to fight against the white government of Ian Smith. The soldiers were divided up and led to capture various key government buildings, with the Chief of Defense Staff being at an OAU meeting. The ranking officer was General Charles Barwood, reportedly shot to death when he refused to cooperate with the coup. The State Broadcasting House and International Communications buildings were captured quickly. The heaviest fighting broke out at the Flagstaff House, the presidential residence, where the military overthrowers met resistance from the Presidential Guard. The coup leaders informed the public of the regime change over the radio at dawn on February 24, 1966. Colonel Kokota's statement over the radio was as follows: "Fellow citizens of Ghana, I have come to inform you that the military, in cooperation with the Ghana police, have taken over the government of Ghana today. The myth surrounding Nkrumah has been broken. Parliament is dissolved and Kwame Nkrumah is dismissed from office. All ministers are also dismissed. The Convention People's Party is disbanded with effect from now. It will be illegal for any person to belong to it." The soldiers proceeded to arrest CPP ministers as fighting with the Presidential Guard continued. When Colonel Kokota threatened to bomb the presidential residence if resistance continued after 12 p.m., Nkrumah's wife Fathia Nkrumah advised the guards to surrender, and they did. A CIA telegram informed Washington of the coup, and said, "The coup leaders appear to be implementing the plans they were reported earlier to have agreed on for the immediate post-coup period." Quote, according to the military, 20 members of the Presidential Guard had been killed and 25 wounded. Others suggest a death toll of 1,600. Quote, Nkrumah biographer June Milne. Whatever the death toll, it was far from the bloodless coup reported in the British press. Early events. Formation of Council. Francis Kwashi, part of the core planning group for the takeover, later commented that he and his comrades lacked the faintest idea of how to proceed upon gaining power. Several participants seemed to believe that the victorious officers would simply hand-pick acceptable civilian administrators and put them in charge. Marginalizing Nkrumah and other radicals would allow a sort of merger between the Convention People's Party and the opposition United Party, and the work of government could go on. The group decided that an interim government was necessary and went about determining its membership. Kokota and Harley, the most obvious candidates for nominal leadership, turned the position down, preferring instead to retain command over the respective forces. Thus, on February 21, the group selected J.A. Ankara, a popular general who suffered involuntary retirement in August 1965. The decision to form a ruling council was made on the morning of the coup, at a meeting which included Harley, Kokota, and Ankara, as well as Emmanuel Nkrumah-The, head of the Central Bureau of Statistics, Supreme Court Justice Fred Kwazi-Apollo, Director of Public Prosecutions Austin N.E. Amisa, and Security Officer D.S. Kwakupome. The name of the military government, National Liberation Council, was reportedly proposed by General Kotoka as an alternative to National Revolutionary Council, to indicate that the new leader sought to liberate the country from Nkrumah and the CPP rather than to transform society. The council consisted of 4 soldiers and 4 police officers. Lt. Gen. J.A. Ankara, Chairman of the NLC and Head of State. Mr. J.W.K. Harley, Vice Chairman of the NLC. Brigadier Akwasi Amankwa Afrifa, Chairman of the NLC and Head of State. Lt. Gen. Emmanuel K. Kotoka. Mr. Bia Yakubu. Major General Albert Kwesi-Okran. Mr. Anthony K. Deku. Mr. J.E.O. Nanu. With this membership, the council displayed more ethnic diversity than did the core group of coup planners. 2 members, Nanu and Yakubu, had no advanced knowledge of the coup at all. Immediate political changes and continuities. 3 committees, the Economic Committee, the Administrative Committee, and the Publicity Committee, manifested on the day of the coup as organs of government. The Economic Committee, in particular, was composed of high-ranking members of the pre-existing civil service and played the lead role in creating the policies of the new government. The coup leaders and the technocrats of the civil service shared the view that politics and politicians needed to be set aside in order to set up a more effective government apparatus. The military and police, lacking knowledge of economics and governance, relied on the civil service to concoct and engineer the necessary changes. The first proclamation of the new government, issued 2 days after the coup, suspended Ghana's 1960 constitution, dismissed Nkrumah, dissolved the National Assembly and the Convention People's Party, and named Ankara as chairman and Harley as deputy chairman. Next, the council declared its intention to restore civilian government as soon as possible, and its plan for separation of powers between executive, legislative, and judicial branches. The council decreed that the judicial system would continue along the same model, but judges were asked to take new oaths in which they agreed to abide by government decrees. The new government made membership in the Convention People's Party illegal and took hundreds of people into protective custody. These included former members of parliament and district commissioners, as well as 446 people affiliated directly with Nkrumah, including his financial advisor and his driver. Leaders of the Ghana Muslim Council were dismissed on the grounds of the party loyalties. Formation of new political parties was banned. Commissioners were established to investigate corruption in the previous regime and to organize a continued suppression of the CPP. The NLC disbanded and confiscated the assets of 8 Nkrumahist organizations, including the United Ghana Farmers Cooperative Council, the National Council of Ghana Women and the Ghana Youth Pioneers. Boy Scouts and Girl Guides groups were introduced to replace the latter. Once the CPP was no longer seen as a political threat, the new government indicated that it would not retaliate excessively against officials from the old regime. All but 20 of the hundreds of imprisoned Nkrumahists were free by 1968. And although the system of ministries was rearranged, the membership and hierarchy of the civil service remained mostly intact, and in fact gained power after the coup. B.A. Bentham was appointed Secretary-General of the Trades Union Congress and authorized to cull its old CPP leadership. Bentham dissociated the Trades Union Congress from the All-African Trade Union Federation, began a productivity drive to raise output, helped the government with public relations abroad, and created a mechanism for supplying civilian workers to assist the armed forces. Popular support public demonstrations were held in support of the new government, especially by public organizations in Accra. Nkrumah, in China, claimed that the military had orchestrated these demonstrations, in part because Nigeria's military had accomplished a coup of its own in January 1966. Regime change in Ghana did not come as a complete shock. Under new leadership, groups like the Trades Union Congress and the Ghana Young Pioneers celebrated the coup and renounced Nkrumah's socialism. On March 4, top Nkrumah aide Emmanuel Kwame publicly accused the former president of corruption. Other party leaders followed suit. The government released more than 800 prisoners from the previous regime. By June 1966, spokesmen for the new government began to qualify the statements on the restoration of civilian government, saying more time was needed to establish an effective machinery of government and for people to readjust to the new situation. Rule by the National Liberation Council was sustained by strong support from the intelligentsia in the civil service and at university, as well as by the military and police forces themselves. Diplomatic realignment. Diplomatic relations with Russia, China, and Cuba were ceased, their embassies closed, and the technicians ejected. Ghana withdrew its embassies from these countries, from Hanoi in North Vietnam, and from 5 countries in Eastern Europe. For the West, the coup was immediately rewarded by food aid and a relaxation of the policies designed to isolate Ghana. World cocoa prices began to increase. Relations with Britain, which had been suspended over the Rhodesia issue, were restored. Robert Comer of the National Security Council wrote to Lyndon Johnson, "The coup in Ghana is another example of a fortuitous windfall. Nkrumah was doing more to undermine our interests than any other black African." In reaction to his strongly pro-communist leanings, the new military regime is almost pathetically pro-Western. The point of this memo is that we ought to follow through skillfully and consolidate such successes. A few thousand tons of surplus wheat or rice, given now when the new regimes are quite uncertain as to the future relations with us, could have a psychological significance out of all proportion to the cost of the gesture. I am not arguing for lavish gifts to these regimes. Indeed, giving them a little only whets their appetites, and enables us to use the prospect of more as leverage. Leaders in the new regime, as well as observers in business and the press, declared Ghana open for business with Western multinationals. Representatives from the IMF and the World Bank arrived in Accra in March 1966, quickly establishing a plan for very close collaboration.